Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, 1979 to 1990. Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Iron Lady, Margaret Thatcher. His political career and achievements. Everything about the United Kingdom and Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Margaret Thatcher. Her life and everything about him. Part 5. Thatcher appointed Lord Carrington, an ennobled member of the party and former Secretary of State for Defense, to run the Foreign Office in 1979. Although considered a wet, he avoided domestic affairs and got along well with Thatcher. One issue was what to do with Rhodesia, where the white minority had determined to rule the prosperous black majority breakaway colony in the face of overwhelming international criticism. With the 1975 Portuguese collapse in the continent, South Africa, which had been Rhodesia's chief supporter, realized that their ally was a liability. Black rule was inevitable, and the Thatcher government brokered a peaceful solution to end the Rhodesian Bush War in December 1979 via the Lancaster House Agreement. The conference at Lancaster House was attended by Rhodesian Prime Minister Ian Smith, as well as by the key black leaders, Muzorewa, Mugabe, Nkomo, and Tongogara. The result was the new Zimbabwean nation under black rule in 1980. Thatcher's first foreign policy crisis came with the 1979 Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. She condemned the invasion, said it showed the bankruptcy of a détente policy, and helped convince some British athletes to boycott the 1980 Moscow Olympics. She gave weak support to U.S. President Jimmy Carter, who tried to punish the USSR with economic sanctions. Britain's economic situation was precarious, and most of NATO was reluctant to cut trade ties. Thatcher nevertheless gave the go-ahead for Whitehall to approve MI6, along with the SAS, to undertake disruptive action in Afghanistan. As well as working with the CIA in Operation Cyclone, they also supplied weapons, training, and intelligence to the Mujahideen. The Financial Times reported in 2011 that her government had secretly supplied Iraq under Saddam Hussein with non-lethal military equipment since 1981. Having withdrawn formal recognition from the Pol Pot regime in 1979, the Thatcher government backed the Khmer Rouge, keeping their UN seat after they were ousted from power in Cambodia by the Cambodian-Vietnamese War. Although Thatcher denied it at the time, it was revealed in 1991 that, while not directly training any Khmer Rouge from 1983, the Special Air Service, SAS, was sent to secretly train the armed forces of the Cambodian non-communist resistance that remained loyal to Prince Norodom Sihanouk and his former Prime Minister Son Sann in the fight against the Vietnamese-backed puppet regime. Thatcher was one of the first Western leaders to respond warmly to reformist Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev. Following Reagan-Gorbachev summit meetings and reforms enacted by Gorbachev in the USSR, she declared in November 1988 that we are not in a Cold War now, but rather in a new relationship much wider than the Cold War ever was. She went on a state visit to the Soviet Union in 1984 and met with Gorbachev and Council of Ministers Chairman Nikolai Ryzhkov. Despite opposite personalities, Thatcher bonded quickly with U.S. President Ronald Reagan. She gave strong support to the Reagan administration's Cold War policies based on their shared distrust of communism. A sharp disagreement came in 1983, when Reagan did not consult with her on the invasion of Grenada. During her first year as Prime Minister, she supported NATO's decision to deploy U.S. nuclear cruise and Pershing II missiles in Western Europe, permitting the U.S. to station more than 160 cruise missiles at RAF Greenham Common, starting in November 1983, and triggering mass protests by the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament. She bought the Trident nuclear missile submarine system from the U.S. to replace Polaris, tripling the UK's nuclear forces at an eventual cost of more than £12 billion at 1996-97 prices. Thatcher's preference for defense ties with the U.S. was demonstrated in the Westland Affair of 1985-86, when she acted with colleagues to allow the struggling helicopter manufacturer Westland to refuse a takeover offer from the Italian firm Augusta in favor of the management's preferred option, a link with Sikorsky Aircraft. Defense Secretary Michael Heseltine, who had supported the Augusta deal, resigned from the government in protest. In April 1986, she permitted US F-111s to use Royal Air Force bases for the bombing of Libya in retaliation for the Libyan bombing of a Berlin discotheque, citing the right of self-defense under Article 51 of the UN Charter. Polls suggested that fewer than 1 in 3 British citizens approved of her decision. Thatcher was in the U.S. on a state visit when Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait in August 1990. During her talks with President George H.W. Bush, who succeeded Reagan in 1989, she recommended intervention and put pressure on Bush to deploy troops in the Middle East to drive the Iraqi army out of Kuwait. Bush was apprehensive about the plan, prompting Thatcher to remark to him during a telephone conversation, "This was no time to go wobbly." Thatcher's government supplied military forces to the international coalition in the build-up to the Gulf War, but she had resigned by the time hostilities began on the 17th of January 1991. She applauded the coalition victory on the backbenches, while warning that the victories of peace will take longer than the battles of war. It was disclosed in 2017 that Thatcher had suggested threatening Saddam with chemical weapons after the invasion of Kuwait. On the 2nd of April 1982, the military junta in Argentina ordered the invasion of the Crown Colony of the Falkland Islands and its dependency of South Georgia, beginning the Falklands War. The subsequent crisis was a defining moment of Thatcher's premiership. At the suggestion of Harold Macmillan and Robert Armstrong, she set up and chaired a small war cabinet to oversee the conduct of the war, which by the 5th to the 6th of April had authorized and dispatched a naval task force to retake the islands. Argentina surrendered on the 14th of June, and Operation Corporate was hailed a success, notwithstanding the deaths of 255 British servicemen and 3 Falkland Islanders. Argentine fatalities totaled 649, half of them aboard R.A. General Belgrano, that was torpedoed and sunk by HMS Conqueror on the 2nd of May. Thatcher was criticized for the neglect of the Falklands, defense that led to the war, and especially by Labour MP Tam Dalyell in Parliament for the decision to torpedo the General Belgrano, but overall she was considered a competent and committed war leader. The Falklands Factor, an economic recovery beginning early in 1982, and a bitterly divided opposition all contributed to Thatcher's second election victory in 1983. Thatcher often referred after the war to the Falklands spirit. In September 1982, she visited China to discuss with Deng Xiaoping the sovereignty of Hong Kong after 1997. China was the first communist state Thatcher had visited as prime minister, and she was the first British prime minister to visit China. Throughout their meeting, she sought the PRC's agreement to a continued British presence in the territory. Deng insisted that the PRC's sovereignty over Hong Kong was non-negotiable, but stated his willingness to settle the sovereignty issue with the British government through formal negotiations. Both governments promised to maintain Hong Kong's stability and prosperity. After the 2-year negotiations, Thatcher conceded to the PRC government and signed the Sino-British Joint Declaration in Beijing in 1984, agreeing to hand over Hong Kong's sovereignty in 1997. Despite saying that she was in favor of peaceful negotiations to end apartheid, Thatcher opposed sanctions imposed on South Africa by the Commonwealth and the European Economic Community, EEC. She attempted to preserve trade with South Africa while persuading its government to abandon apartheid. This included asking herself as President Botha's candid friend and inviting him to visit the UK in 1984, despite the inevitable demonstrations against his government. Alan Merridew of the Canadian broadcaster BCTV News asked Thatcher what her response was to a reported ANC statement that they will target British firms in South Africa, to which she later replied, "Jam, when the ANC says that they will target British companies." This shows what a typical terrorist organization it is. I fought terrorism all my life, and if more people fought it, and we were all more successful, we should not have it, and I hope that everyone in this hall will think it is right to go on fighting terrorism. During his visit to Britain 5 months after his release from prison, Nelson Mandela praised Thatcher. "She is an enemy of apartheid. We have much to thank her for." Thatcher and her party supported British membership of the EEC in the 1975 national referendum and the Single European Act of 1986, and obtained the UK rebate on contributions, but she believed that the role of the organization should be limited to ensuring free trade and effective competition, and feared that the EEC approach was at odds with her views on smaller government and deregulation. Believing that the single market would result in political integration, Thatcher's opposition to further European integration became more pronounced during her premiership, and particularly after her third government in 1987. In her Bruges speech in 1988, Thatcher outlined her opposition to proposals from the EEC, forerunner of the European Union, for a federal structure and increased centralization of decision-making. We have not successfully rolled back the frontiers of the state in Britain, only to see them reimposed at a European level, with a European superstate exercising a new dominance from Brussels. Sharing the concerns of French President François Mitterrand, Thatcher was initially opposed to German reunification, telling Gorbachev that it would lead to a change to post-war borders, and we cannot allow that because such a development would undermine the stability of the whole international situation and could endanger our security. She expressed concern that a united Germany would align itself more closely with the Soviet Union and move away from NATO. In March 1990, Thatcher held a Chequers seminar on the subject of German reunification that was attended by members of her cabinet and historians such as Norman Stone, George Urban, Timothy Garton Ash, and Gordon A. Craig. During the seminar, Thatcher described what Urban called saloon bar clichés about the German character, including angst, aggressiveness, assertiveness, bullying, egotism, inferiority complex, and sentimentality. Those present were shocked to hear Thatcher's utterances and appalled at how she was apparently unaware about the post-war German collective guilt and Germans' attempts to work through their past. The words of the meeting were leaked by her foreign policy advisor Charles Powell, and, subsequently, her comments were met with fierce backlash and controversy. During the same month, German Chancellor Helmut Kohl reassured Thatcher that he would keep her informed of all his intentions about unification, and that he was prepared to disclose matters which even his cabinet would not know. During her premiership, Thatcher had the second lowest average approval rating, 40%, of any post-war prime minister. Since Nigel Lawson's resignation as Chancellor in October 1989, polls consistently showed that she was less popular than her party. A self-described conviction politician, Thatcher always insisted that she did not care about her poll ratings and pointed instead to her unbeaten election record. In December 1989, Thatcher was challenged for the leadership of the Conservative Party by the little-known backbench MP Sir Anthony Meyer. Of the 374 Conservative MPs eligible to vote, 314 voted for Thatcher and 33 for Meyer. Her supporters in the party viewed the result as a success and rejected suggestions that there was discontent within the party. Opinion polls in September 1990 reported that Labour had established a 14% lead over the Conservatives, and by November, the Conservatives had been trailing Labour for 18 months. These ratings, together with Thatcher's combative personality and tendency to override collegiate opinion, contributed to further discontent within her party. In July 1989, Thatcher removed Geoffrey Howe as Foreign Secretary after he and Lawson had forced her to agree to a plan for Britain to join the European Exchange Rate Mechanism, ERM. Britain joined the ERM in October 1990. On the 1st of November 1990, Howe, by then the last remaining member of Thatcher's original 1979 cabinet, resigned as Deputy Prime Minister, ostensibly over her open hostility to moves towards European Monetary Union. In his resignation speech on the 13th of November, which was instrumental in Thatcher's downfall, Howe attacked Thatcher's openly dismissive attitude to the government's proposal for a new European currency competing against existing currencies. A hard ECU. How on earth are the Chancellor and the Governor of the Bank of England, commending the hard ECU as they strive to be taken as serious participants in the debate against that kind of background noise? I believe that both the Chancellor and the Governor are cricketing enthusiasts, so I hope that there is no monopoly of cricketing metaphors. It is rather like sending your opening batsmen to the crease only for them to find, the moment the first balls are bowled, that their bats have been broken before the game by the team captain. On the 14th of November, Michael Heseltine mounted a challenge for the leadership of the Conservative Party. Opinion polls had indicated that he would give the Conservatives a national lead over Labour. Although Thatcher led on the first ballot with the votes of 204 Conservative MPs, 54.8%, to 152 votes, 40.9% for Heseltine, with 16 abstentions, she was 4 votes short of the required 15% majority. A second ballot was therefore necessary. Thatcher initially declared her intention to fight on and fight to win the second ballot, but consultation with her cabinet persuaded her to withdraw. After holding an audience with the Queen, calling other world leaders, and making one final common speech, on the 28th of November she left Downing Street in tears. She reportedly regarded her ousting as a betrayal. Her resignation was a shock to many outside Britain, with such foreign observers as Henry Kissinger and Gorbachev expressing private consternation. Chancellor John Major replaced Thatcher as head of government and party leader, whose lead over Heseltine in the second ballot was sufficient for Heseltine to drop out. Major oversaw an upturn in conservative support in the 17 months leading to the 1992 general election and led the party to a fourth successive victory on the 9th of April 1992. Thatcher had lobbied for Major in the leadership contest against Heseltine, but her support for him waned in later years. After leaving the premiership, Thatcher returned to the backbenches as a constituency parliamentarian. Her domestic approval rating recovered after her resignation, though public opinion remained divided on whether her government had been good for the country. Aged 66, she retired from the House of Commons at the 1992 general election, saying that leaving the Commons would allow her more freedom to speak her mind. On leaving the Commons, Thatcher became the first former British Prime Minister to set up a foundation. The British wing of the Margaret Thatcher Foundation was dissolved in 2005 due to financial difficulties. She wrote 2 volumes of memoirs, The Downing Street Years, 1993, and The Path to Power, 1995. In 1991, she and her husband Dennis moved to a house in Chester Square, a residential garden square in central London's Belgravia district. Thatcher was hired by the tobacco company Philip Morris as a geopolitical consultant in July 1992 for $250,000 per year and an annual contribution of $250,000 to her foundation. Thatcher earned $50,000 for each speech she delivered. Thatcher became an advocate of Croatian and Slovenian independence. Commenting on the Yugoslav wars, in a 1991 interview for Croatian radio television, she was critical of Western governments for not recognizing the breakaway republics of Croatia and Slovenia as independent, and for not supplying them with arms after the Serbian-led Yugoslav army attacked. In August 1992, she called for NATO to stop the Serbian assault on Gorazde and Sarajevo to end ethnic cleansing during the Bosnian War, comparing the situation in Bosnia-Herzegovina to the barbarities of Hitler's and Stalin's. She made a series of speeches in the Lords criticizing the Maastricht Treaty, describing it as a treaty too far, and stated, "I could never have signed this treaty." She cited A.V. Dicey when arguing that, as all 3 main parties were in favor of the treaty, the people should have their say in a referendum. Thatcher served as honorary chancellor of the College of William and Mary in Virginia from 1993 to 2000. While also serving as chancellor of the private University of Buckingham from 1992 to 1998, a university she had formally opened in 1976 as the former education secretary. I stop at this point today. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and keep exploring the world's incredible stories. Soon, we will publish Part 6. If you have any comments, please leave us your comments, because they are important to us. Thank you for watching.